Hi. Thank you so much for being here. Adrienne, I'm
Welcome.
sorry that we've run long, but I'm so excited to talk to you about this. For those of you who don't know Adrienne's book, you should, because it's amazing. It is it's like a manual. It's basically like everyone should have it. You should have it on your coffee table. You should have it in your bathroom. You should have it where your table of coffee is.
A womanual?
Womanual? It's a womanual.
I'm sorry. I'll see myself out.
Please.
Very
please.
nice. All right then.
It's very much a how-to, and I appreciate that. And actually what I feel when I read this book, Adrienne, is that you're like a girlfriend and you're telling me what you think I should do, and you're giving me all these scenarios, and you're helping me like map out my plan if I've experienced sexual harassment, and you're building me up, and it's just like, it's all the things, and I love it. And I want to know, first of all, why you wrote it. Why'd you undertake this particular book about sexual harassment and getting through it?
Because there's nothing out there like it. It's like I've been through it at workplaces, and despite being a lawyer and being extremely educated, it's scary as hell, because this could mess up my money. Like, this could mess up my entire career path if I don't handle this person the right way. And so when I went looking for it, everything out there is, these kind of just either legal reference manuals or these memoirs. And that's just not what I need. I need some stuff that's research back, that's also real, authentic, and just gets to it. So I went ahead and wrote it.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't waste any time being like, is sexual harassment a problem? Here's why, and here's when. Why do harassers harass? It's very much like, no. This is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something hard to admit, because a lot of people are like, well, we have to stop the sexual harassment. But your book is basically like, no, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And this is how you can, it's almost like a self-defense training for it.
Exactly. Yeah, because the reality is, it's like, it happens to everyone. It's just some people it doesn't threaten because they're in a position of power, whether it's societal power because of their gender or maybe their position, but it's going to happen. It's essentially just bullying, someone bullying you because of your gender and not wanting you there because maybe you don't fit their norms of how you should look or how you should act. Or maybe they think you're threatening because, you're awesome. You just happen to be of a different gender or race. But hey, it's going to happen, and it happens all the time.
Right. And you yourselves have not only like been sexually harassed in different workplaces, but also have successfully sued ESPN in particular, kind of, I think as you called it, like the beast, like slaying the beast kind of thing. Obviously ESPN sports, we imagine that there's a lot of sexual harassment, but I think we also imagine that a lot of that is sort of supposed to come with the territory, right? But now we're in this new era, and folks like yourself who are successfully suing and winning and then trying to equip other people. What did you learn from that whole experience? And how had your prior experiences equipped you for what happened there?
Well, I had always worked in predominantly male-dominated areas. I put myself through undergrad working at a car dealership and then major law firms after that. But I did not find the environment to be as insidious as it was in sports broadcast. But also sports broadcast is predominantly white and male, and sexual harassment is about power and keeping you out of positions of power, oftentimes based on your gender, how you portray yourself, and also your race. So it was an experience. It taught me a lot about things that I knew I experienced and validated that because the book is heavily researched. I didn't want it to sound researchy. I wanted to sound, just authentic and like, I'm just talking to you. So, but yeah, a lot of Harvard Business Review, a lot of information that I'd be like, oh, that's why I experienced that. Oh, that's why that happened. And so when you have a lot of stats and studies behind essentially saying, yeah, that's really normal, it feels really good.
Can I ask, like, the sort of I feel like the mainstream way that people talk about sexual harassment is like as a bad thing that is sad that happens to certain people. But you just said something that seemed super profound to me, that like it's a way of keeping women out of positions of power. And can you sort of expound more on like the relationship between sexual harassment and the gender wage gap and the glass ceiling?
Oh yeah, they're all very much intersected. It's a way, because in society, whoever is on top is the one that gets to control what the culture looks like, what we do, everything in terms of how we act and the norms and whatnot. And it's always generally been white males. So as our society,
Not a fan.
so as our societies continue to progress, they've given up a little power to women. And as a result of that, you'll see there's significant pushback from men in one of the places that is like the hugest for power, which is the workplace, because work is generally money and that gives you economic independence. And so, in terms of paying women less, it perpetuates to continue these norms of keeping women economically independent upon men. And then we'll have sexual harassment occur. You're not sexually harassed on what you look like. You're sexually harassed if you have male dominant traits as a woman, which means, you're independent, you're dominant, and you're assertive. And I happen to have all of those traits. So it does not matter what I look like or what I dress like or how I carry myself. But as long as I essentially exude that energy, you have these feral cats pissing at me all the time. So it kind of... It's a very special place to be, but they're responding that way because they're insecure. And so when you can understand what's going on and why you're getting sexually harassed, which comes in the form of put downs and come-ons, then you're better able to handle it, to keep your job, your economic independence, and to stay dope and mentally healthy, and it's good.
Dude, it's like, but I feel like you say the things that everyone is afraid to say because you're basically admitting exactly. You're like, they're going to be harassers. And in the book, you literally identify like 4 or 5 different types of harassers. Then you identify 4 or 5 different types of enablers, whether they be men or women, but generally it's sort of women who you might confide in, women who will tell you that, or people, enablers who will even help with the, like the setup, i.e. like Weinstein's, assistants, or people would tell you to just, shut up. That's the way it is. Hey, this is the way the world works. And so it's so specific. You also identify how to see if a workplace is going to be a place where they allow harassment or not. Why is the current framework around like HR and around around legality as a lawyer, as an attorney, like why is that insufficient? Why did you need all of this to help all of that? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. All right. So the book, I separate it into 2 issues because the reality is that sexual harassment is rarely a legal issue. Like some 5 million employees minimum are sexually harassed a year in the United States. Less than 1% ever even file a complaint with the EEOC. That's the government agency that oversees complaints. So less than 1%. So few times does it actually ever end up in a legal arena. So we want to put the legal stuff aside and focus just on the sociological behavioral aspects of the interactions, because the reality is also the law is not set up to help you. And that's also why companies don't do a damn thing to stop it. The law is written in their favor. They've lobbied for it that way. For instance, there is a statutory cap on how much you can get for punitive and compensatory damages for a jury award. The limit is $300,000. That's no money. That is nothing. And so companies, shoulder shrugs. They also have insurance that pays for the litigation fees. Also, litigation, all these legal costs, that's tax deductible for these companies. So they have no fears about not complying with the law. So essentially that means that making sexual harassment go away would have to be more of an ethical or a business or a moral issue. And as we know, these companies have no morals and they have no ethics. And they don't see the business value in it yet because they don't value a woman in the workplace and her contributions. Otherwise, they'd pay her more and treat her better. So essentially, companies are disincentivized to eliminate sexual harassment, which is why I tell people it is going to happen to you. So just be prepared, just like you would be prepared to negotiate salary or anything else in the business world, because it's just part of doing business, unfortunately, until our society gets its shit together.
I had one of my friends used to do work with men who had been involved in domestic violence, and he said that there was a phrase that they use in that field that he found troubling, which was that a lot of the work is about refining our response to the inevitable. And so like the strategies are about refining our response to the inevitable. And like we have such a hard time with this issue, specifically imagining what would need to change in the world to have it stop happening entirely. Do you have a utopian vision about what that could look like?
The thing is, power is something that you take. It's not given to you. And sexual harassment is something that impacts women the most in the workplace. And we need women, unfortunately, to take the power back, to step up and to call more of this stuff out, to educate themselves, to know how to navigate it so that they can stay in the game, so that they don't get pushed out of careers and off track. Because the reality is that the bad guy isn't going to change and the company is on the bad guy's side, if not one of the bad guys. So once we accept that, and we accept also that our worth and we don't have to take this, and we learn to fight back and to speak up, then we're going to be a lot more powerful in taking our piece of the pie.
I mean, I think that's something that really stuck with me in reading the book was that you were sexually harassed in a different setting, in a legal setting, right, as an attorney, and that it turned you off to the whole industry, and you went and worked at a hot LA restaurant for a while and just like cleared your head and did something completely different, although I'm sure no less toxic and terrible when it comes to nasty harass holes, as you call them. But I wanted to just read something because there's a myth out there around cancel culture. Some elites got together and wrote a big letter about it. They're academics. And there's this idea that, men especially, I mean, it came around as a reaction to the Me Too movement, that like men are losing their jobs, these poor men, these like they had great careers. Louis C.K. had a movie that was coming out and all, they've lost everything. And I just wanted to read a little bit of
Louis C.K. couldn't put out
book.
his movie about being a child molester because it's so unfair.
So you're right. While men are likely to remain in high-paying jobs after their professional climb is disrupted, women are often held back, ultimately suffering long-term economic injury. And you say that 8 in 10 women who are sexually harassed leave their employers within 2 years of the initial harassment. And they're more likely than men to suffer greater financial stress in the 24 months that follow, and then are more likely to accept lower paying jobs or avoid that whole industry together because they're afraid of further harassment. And I mean, case in point, although so many, Weinstein again, and so many of the young actresses that he targeted who completely were like, this is Hollywood, like, bye.
Yeah.
One of the other things is I just want to say that you highlight the ways that men have failed upwards.
Yeah.
So like people who've lost their jobs, for example, I think someone who worked on the Bernie Sanders campaign, Robert Becker, forcibly kissed someone in 2016 and then was fired. And then Marianne Williamson hired him to run her presidential campaign, failing up. And then Glenn Thrush from the New York Times was suspended as White House correspondent without pay, and then he was just reassigned to a different department. And then Ilal Gutentag, which is an incredible name.
It is, especially if you're out here
aside.
messing around. Like, because part of me is like, you're Googleable. You're Googleable on like the majorest level.
Gutentag, and he worked for the general manager of Uber. Anyway, he was groping multiple employees, and then he was fired, but rehired by Hop, Skip, Drive and ZipRecruiter. I mean, these people, they continue to get jobs. So no one is actually getting canceled. Like,
nope.
Right.
Except for the women who stand
that
up for themselves. They get canceled very often, and very much so, as the industry will box them out. Because part of the patriarchy is this implicit rule that you do not tell the secrets, the bad things that happen to you, essentially. And so by rattling those cages and speaking up, you have broken a rule. And as a result, the industry will box you out, which is why a lot of women remain silent. It's a form of retaliation that spreads wide and far.
Can you describe? So, Adrienne, I'm a hybrid comedian union organizer, and in my union organizer capacity, I've worked with women who have been sexually harassed in the workplace, and the first time I went through it, I was stunned to see, like, people are always like, well, why didn't you just report it? Why didn't you just come forward when this thing happened to you? And I was working with these young women who worked in a restaurant chain in San Francisco, and the number of obstacles to them reporting it, just at every step of the way, they had to be like re-traumatized in telling their story to some faceless government bureaucrat to convince them that it was serious and that it was real enough to get them to take them seriously. Could you describe some of the obstacles that get in the way of people coming forward? Why it's only 1% that actually gets reported?
All right. It is very well known that when you stand up for yourself or report sexual harassment, that your colleagues will distance themselves from you, because it's essentially signifying that you're about to be in trouble, that you, the one who's victimized, is about to become the problem. So not only will your colleagues abandon you, but then in addition to that, there's a fair amount of gaslighting that goes on. Are you sure that's what he meant? Are you sure he wasn't just kidding? Are you sure you read that right? A lot of undermining of your judgment and recollection. Also, your colleagues, HR, will try to make you feel like the behavior wasn't significant and try to make you show the significance of that interaction. Well, did he touch you? I can't see how this is really something to complain about. And then, of course, there's good old-fashioned retaliation, which happens in the vast majority, if not all instances. 75% of EEOC complaints that allege sexual harassment also include retaliation. So you can lose your job, be demoted, prevented from being promoted. And it's just, it's essentially you're making your life a shitstorm if you speak up, which is generally why reporting sexual harassment is the last thing that people ever do. And it has to be really bad.
I just want to share, I think I've told Adrienne this, but I think knowing how bad your company's HR is and how ham-fisted they are is also a reason not to speak up. Like, you're afraid of the repercussions. I mean, if, let's say it's not something that's putting you in horrible harm, but it's just really distracting. I had a situation like that where I was like, look, I can deal with it. I sort of took your route. Not one of the paths that you lay out in this book, which I think really lays out all the different ways you can address it. And one of those is going to HR. But I was like, dude, I don't trust these idiots in HR to deal with this issue, to mediate well. So I'm just going to talk to this person myself. And it was okay. It actually worked out. But like, that's why, is because you also see that your supervisors are super ill-equipped to deal with the nuance or the particulars of the situation.
Yeah, because that's one thing that is why sexual harassment is handled so poorly at companies. They treat it like a legal issue, as opposed to a behavioral issue of someone just being an asshole. And so, if someone sexually assaults someone, like physically, oh no, we're in police territory. No, that's not for supervisors and managers. But if someone is essentially being a harasshole, that's something your boss can handle. Your boss should be able to say, hey, leave her alone, or hey, stop doing this. It's not that big a deal. But unfortunately, when companies treat it like a legal issue, it becomes you versus me. And you become my opponent, and it becomes a matter of them, shredding documents, engaging in all sorts of nonsense that have nothing to do with rectifying the situation or making things better, as much as it has to do with them getting you up out the paint and CYing their own asses.
I know there's some other questions, but before we move on, I wanted to ask you about, as a Black woman, what are your experiences with, and what are the stats around how gender discrimination and sexual harassment intersect with race? Are women of color, and Black women maybe in particular, more likely to be targeted?
Oh, absolutely. Because we're the lowest on the totem pole. So any climbing we have will threaten the power structure. And so, and also too, being the lowest on the totem pole, there's going to be less social outcry for our victimization, as we're seeing with Breonna Taylor not being able to get justice. And I can't even recall any of the Black women who've been murdered in police custody getting an officer in any way even charged or convicted. But that's just on my own recollection. But we see that also play out in the workplace, where Black women are targeted the most for sexual harassment. They tend to get more come-ons, whereas white women tend to get more put-downs. And that has to do with, in part, the legacy of slavery, where white men would rape Black women and justify it by labeling us Jezebels and this thought that we're always sexually available. And so that gets played on in the workplace when men come at us as Black women. And research has shown that Black women file 3 times as many sexual harassment complaints as white women. And it is damn sure not because we complain more, because if anything, we actually complain a far lot less. But it's because the shit is so bad for us. But that's the reality. You know, we are on the lowest in the totem pole when it comes to race and when it comes to gender. And when that intersects, people who are threatened by our rise, or they like to prey on the vulnerable, they do love heading our way.
All right. A question from the audience. Yes Star on Twitch asked Adrienne, this is the last question. I know you address this on your book, which you should get, Staying in the Game. But what do you do to stay emotionally and mentally stable? How do you deal with all this? And also, you know, keep it together.
So research shows, which I would have loved to have known before I even joined ESPN or even the workforce, but research shows that when you are educated and informed on these things and what happens and how they will happen, that your ability to handle and process sexual harassment and everything that's going on is so much better. It means that the mental and the psychological burden, which is generally depression, anxiety, and PTSD, will be minimized. And for me, in my own personal situation, watching the people I had considered friends and the people I had stuck my neck out for and help, watching them walk away from me, unfollow me on social media when my shit hit the fan, just essentially just walk away, that hurt the most. And had I known what the research shows, that this is exactly how these people will act, I would have been mentally and emotionally prepared for that. But instead, I ended up with chronic PTSD, which sucks. A lot of depression, anxiety, agoraphobia, and all sorts of things. And a lot of people don't realize how much workplace trauma can fuck you up. And so you really need to be prepared, because I think that's the hardest thing about my book, is that, you know, I talk about it in a super easy, relaxed type of way, because it's a tough subject. So I have fun with it. But the reality is, a lot of people have responded with, I'm really glad this book is out here. I loved reading it. At the same time, I wish I had it before X, Y, and Z. And so that is the hardest thing, wanting people to have this information and to know how to deal with it before it happens to them. But at the same time, to be able to convince people of the fact that, yeah, you're going to step on that landmine. It's right down that path. Few people will say, okay, let me prepare in advance. Most people skip their asses on over to it and just pop, you know, so it's all I can do is provide that information to them in the aftermath, because they don't want to listen in advance.
So no particular cocktail or crystal or yoga position, or
you got to find, my book goes over ways in which you can, you know, try to minimize it, but it's the thing that's shown to do the most is when you know what to expect.
That's a hard sell for a book, ladies and gentlemen, right there. And a good one. Adrienne, thank you so much for telling us about all that and just talking. I have so many more questions. I feel like we could talk.
Scaring the hell out of you. I was like so negative. Sorry.